Hi, this is Dan Hickey. This talk was delivered at the DevLearn conference in Las Vegas, October 1, 2015. I'm affiliated with the Learning Sciences program at Indiana University. This work was carried out at the Center for Research on Learning and Technology. I want to acknowledge the generous support of the MacArthur Foundation. As Connie Yowell mentioned yesterday in her keynote, MacArthur has invested about $150 million into digital media and learning, and a significant portion of this was directed at digital badges. And I'm just deeply grateful for the MacArthur Foundation support really over the past 6 years. Um, I'll also talk about work today that was funded by Indiana University, the National Science Foundation, and Google. In her keynote yesterday, Connie said something that was really important. She said that the context in which badges are used is as important as the badges themselves. I'm going to go a step further and say, based on my research and what I'm going to talk about today, is the context is everything with digital badges. Here's why. Digital badges, unlike conventional credentials, contain information, right? And a PDF is not a digital document; it's an analog document, even if it's sent over email. Digital badges, because they have metadata in them, that metadata can contain specific claims of what someone has done or can do, and detailed evidence supporting those claims. And this makes them very different from conventional credentials. In particular, that information can include links to additional information. A badge can be linked to another badge by the badge itself within the new JSON LD standards. This is a really important. So this had a lot of promises. This image goes back from 2011 to the launch of the Digital Media and Learning Competition. Um, right, this information can make all of these connections with the learner in the middle. Learners can control their information more, unlock jobs, educational opportunities. That was the promise of digital badges in 2011. Well, here we are in 2015, and we're certainly not there yet. Um, Even the most zealous advocates admit that many admissions officers are just beginning to look at badges, and many employers are just figuring out what they mean. But we should remind ourselves that the existing admissions and recognition and employment systems evolved alongside each other really over the past century. So there's a lot of networks and relationships and tacit connections in there. Many of them are very informal. People aren't even aware they exist. And so it's going to take a long time for that to adapt to new technologies. Just as it took a long time for workplaces to change with technology, and how most educational settings still are just beginning to change technology. So the first thing I want to do in my talk today is talk about the lessons we learned from the 2012 Badges for Lifelong Learning initiative. I want to start by recommending everyone look at Cheryl Grant was in the thick of this. She did a great job helping coordinate it and learned a lot of lessons. And she wrote about these 29 projects from that perspective. She also completed this lovely and continues to update this annotated bibliography. These are both great sources. What I'd like to do is show you what our general conclusions are, some of the specific findings from the Design Principles Documentation Project. So we were funded to study these 29 projects over a period of 2 years. With the support of MacArthur, I was able to assemble a very talented team to do this work and had the wonderful collaboration of Haystack in Mozilla. These are the 29 projects. This is a very diverse group of projects. Just to give you a sense of how diverse they are, here's how we have organized them in terms of the types of earners, the standards, the nature of the accreditation, and the setting. So as you can see, they really cover the gamut. What we were after was trying to capture practical wisdom. So as a learning scientist, I'm very concerned with sort of useful knowledge. Rather than sort of applied cognitive science, learning sciences is really about saying, let's build theory in the context of efforts to reform practice. And that theory is best characterized actually as Aristotle characterized it, phronesis. It's contextual and it's value laden. Bent Flyberg, the sociologist, has written about this, but I really like Rich Halverson's characterization. So if you think about badges as an artifact, the practical wisdom associated with where they work better can travel with that badge and be useful for other people. So that's what I'm going to try to present to you today. Here's how we captured the practical wisdom that emerged around these 29 efforts to do something that had never been done before. In order to bring structure to this process, we, after some deliberation, came up with 4 categories of badge functions. A badge is fundamentally a credential. That's what you do with badges. You recognize learning. Now, if you're going to recognize learning, one way or another, you need some sort of an assessment. When you do those 2 things, you're going to be impacting motivation, whether you think about it or not, and you might be impacting motivation in ways that you actually didn't realize you were motivating them. And now the final thing is when you put all of this information inside of digital badges about learning, you have this wealth of new information for studying learning that many of these badging organizations, these organizations implemented badges, they didn't have access to this kind of information because many people don't really think that deeply about what claims they're making about their learners. So in addition to getting this information, people had to figure out what that information was. This turns out to be a very transformative and sometimes very disruptive process for a lot. So first we looked at the evolution of badge design practices. So we reviewed the original proposals very carefully, did content analysis to derive what we characterize as the intended practices. What did you plan to do with digital badges in terms of those 4 functions? Then as projects got underway, we asked them, how's it going? You intended to associate your badges with formal course credit. Have you succeeded? How's that going? What challenges have you faced? Then finally, at the end of the funding period, but while our project was still underway, we asked about what practices were formalized. Are you still issuing badges associated with course credit, for example? That allowed us to track the emergence of more general design principles across projects. So when we got that first set of intended practices, we literally did a card sort to come up with more general categories of practices that we labeled principles. We then formalized those general principles. This allowed us to do something really important. It allowed us to relate the principles that were occurring across projects with the broader research literature so that we could both be informed and hopefully eventually inform out from the badges effort, the larger educational research body. What did we find? Well, one of the things we found very generally, and this was apparent really from the very beginning, was how constraints flow across the levels. We learned a lot about how the contextual factors, right, as Connie said, context matters. Well, context matters a lot, and they impact the very kinds of learning that you can recognize. In other words, what are the purposes of your badges? Is it more formal kinds of learning or is it more informal? Are you going to recognize sort of more crowdsourced kinds of learning? Then we were able to see how that impacted assessment practices, both intended and sometimes unintended. Some people intended their badges to be quite formative, but they turned out really to be quite summative. Some of the badges turned out to be very transformative. We studied how this impacted motivation as well, how that impacted possible research designs. Ultimately, though, very few of these projects did any sort of formal research because that really was not a requirement. And they certainly didn't do a lot of program evaluation. That would have been a lot of people said, we need proof that badges work. Well, that would have been a big mistake, in my opinion, because you would have basically shown that something didn't work before people figured out how to make it work. So one of the resources we have, and my main goal today is just point you to the wealth of resources that's out there from bar projects and other projects that you can draw on. So for example, from my perspective, I was able to write what I think is a pretty useful article about how do these context factors impact what you might do with your badges. I took advantage of a lot of invitations to publish stuff in some of these new online journals to get this information out there. We have an extensive piece on recognition practices that's at our current DPD website that is going forth in a formal report that I hope will be finished about a month from now. Just to give you an idea, so more formal recognition within accredited situations really requires some sort of a formal summative assessment, and that actually can be surprisingly difficult in some settings. Um, This slide gives you some idea of what our data looks like. There you can see on the left, 23 of the projects attempt to align badges to standards, and there you can see the more specific practices within that. Over on the right, I want to draw your attention to the top and the bottom. 15 of the projects attempted to seek external backing for their badges in two different ways. And then at the bottom, 5 of the projects attempted to award formal credit for their badges. This is the DPD website. If you Google Design Principles Documentation Project, you'll find it. There you can get access to Nate Otto's just awesome card deck, which is surprisingly useful for people thinking about designing a badge system. Uh, there is a case study for each of the projects. For instance, this is the 4-H project. You can see down there at the bottom, those are the specific practices that we studied. When you click on that more info, you're going to get a preface that, for instance, points out that they have a new badge system at 4-H that wasn't part of that project. And there's literally, 10 to 15 pages of information about each project. What did we find looking across these projects? Well, one of the things we found is that badges work better in some places than others. There you can see on the left that only 16 of the projects were judged by us that the badge system that they proposed was actually built. 8 of them had a very different badge system than they originally envisioned. In terms of the larger ecosystem around the badges, really only 11 of them succeeded, in our opinion, at accomplishing that, and 7 of them didn't. For example, badges for vets. It turns out that veterans organizations and veterans affairs are incredibly protective of their memberships, and they simply wouldn't play with this new organization. Now, because one of the co-PIs was a graphic designer, they were able to build this beautiful website. The badges ended up not really being used at all, but they ended up building a very vibrant community, a support community for badges. So that's what we mean by where badges work better in some places than others. So if you go to the DPD website, one of the resources are these case studies that my team developed. These will be going forth as vignettes and appendices in this report. 2 configurations there on the right, the badges plus content and badges plus tech and content. Only 2 of them actually implemented their badge system. Smithsonian Museum and Buzz Math were so-called new builds. In this case, though, the DML funding was only a fraction of a much larger investment. Conversely, the Sustainable Agricultural and Food Sciences program at UC Davis tried to use this relatively modest funding from MacArthur really to build an entire degree program around some very sophisticated badges, and that effort ultimately was suspended. It simply was not enough to really get that underway. A second general finding is that badges work better as informal credentials. These are these design principles I talked about earlier. Of the 5 projects who intended to award formal credit, only one, Providence After School Alliance, succeeded. And this was only because they already had a sophisticated system for tracking attendance and reviewing program quality and assessing student work in these after-school settings. But even PASA ended up pausing their badge system. Katie Davis did a very nice ethnographic study as in the badges research project. She now, by the way, has an NSF Career Award around this. She found that the efforts that they had to do to associate the badges with formal credit really got in the way of those badges being valued by their earners. 3D Game Labs, one of the only practices that they were not able to enact was awarding a formal credit. This is because it's hard to do. These other 3 projects, Level Up Youth Digital Filmmaker and SANFS, all were really pretty ambitious projects, and all of them ultimately, the larger projects, did not actually get off the ground, and so the badge systems didn't either. The third finding is that badges work better when they're internally valued. This is one of those recognition practices. Projects struggled to gain external value for badges. So 4 out of 10, so 3D Game Labs was able to secure external endorsement, right? Their badges there at the bottom. Notice they say NOAA Planet Stewards. Well, they had to do a lot of work to get NOAA to allow them to use their name, but NOAA still would not allow them to use the NOAA logo on their badges. So This turned out to be really quite difficult. 6 projects failed for various reasons. Who Built America reported that the National Council for Social Studies, they quote, didn't really understand the concept of badges. That was different than the National Manufacturing Badge System. They reported that the manufacturers, they understood badges, but they didn't trust the validity of the badges. They wanted to see somebody who had earned that badge and see if they could do that job. And that wasn't enough, so there was kind of a chicken and egg problem there. Our fourth principle is badges work better when they offer unique information. So this principle really emerged after the fact. It wasn't one of the things we studied, but it's a bit of an opinion piece here. But 4-H, for example, their badges really duplicated their existing recognition system of ribbons and trophies and their social network of clubs and county fairs. And so the minute they really ran into problems with their badge system, the thing basically just was paused. Here's my last, and what I think is probably the most important principle is badges work better where learning is social and network. We had 2 really wildly successful projects, Supporter to Reporters Medals and Mouse Wins. Now, Supporter to Reporters Medals, these were in the UK. This is a youth journalism project, so students were getting badges for engaging in journalistic practices around, supporters, by the way, as fans in the UK. Really did a nice job. Mouse was a fully online virtual mentoring program for young people, inner city youth, who were learning network administration by working with their schools. Now, importantly, many of their badges were these sort of so-called participation badges. They really made claims that a student had participated in some class that involved interacting with peers and stuff. They maybe didn't even have any formal assessment at all. Now, a lot of people dismiss those as attendance badges, but I beg to differ. I think that their badges were very successful. They also had the advantage of being projects that layered badges into existing content and technology. And this is a really interesting one. I'm really digging deeply into our information here. The more competency-based systems literally all failed. None of them ended up formalizing their badge systems. Level Up and SAFS were 2 very ambitious efforts to shift in K-12 and university settings away from the so-called shackles of the credit hour to the sort of the freedom of competency, and neither of them were able to do it for really interesting reasons. It's a hard thing to do. It's not as easy as people think it is to get away from credit hours. Pathways to Global Competence, also a very ambitious project that never really got broadly underway. Manufacturing Institute in YALSA. So that's what we learned from the project. I hope to have this out in another month or so. It's about 160 pages, a lot of details. In the meantime, most of the information is available at the website. Excuse me. So let me shift gears a little bit and talk about, well, what's the current status of badges in higher education? My current project is called Open Badges in Higher Ed. This is my awesome team on this project. If you go to you can just Google Open Badges in Higher Ed. If you click on the case studies link, we're building a case library of how badges are being used in higher ed. So, for example, our friends in Ireland are doing the All Aboard program, which is a nationwide program in Ireland. You can go there and read about it. There's the email addresses and websites. We're trying to keep this up to detailed, and there you can see the kind of information. We have about 30 projects. We should have about 60 when our project is over in a year. Here you can, there's our calendar. We have bi-weekly meetings. There's an upcoming International Badge Fest in November, which is going to consist of a bunch of meetings. So you can check that out. There's information about the call, blog, resources, a library, lots of stuff for you to draw on, including links to, for instance, different entrepreneurs. My project is actually called Open Badges in edX and Beyond because what we're trying to do, what our initial goal was really getting badges up and running. And there you can see James and I. That's with Lorena Barba and Miguel Amigo of IBL Studios, with Anand Argwal from edX celebrating the Herculean task. It turns out edX is about 700 very messy 700,000 very messy lines of code, and it really was a heavy lift to get badges up and running. But they're in there now. They will be there. Nate Otto is currently working with him to install his Badger platform into both the Open edX. It is in Open edX. It will be in edX.org shortly. Let me shift gears again and talk about. I've had the pleasure of being able to work with badges in my own course context and really push hard. Thanks to a grant from Google in 2013, I got funds to use their Course Builder platform to take my existing course on educational assessment and really blow it up into what I call a BOOC, a big open online course. There you can see it consists of 3 modules: assessment practices, principles, and policies. And this is the badges that people earn in this class. So you can take it for credit, or you can also just enroll. And it's a challenging graduate level course. And you see there at the bottom, there's the assessment practices badge. If you get the badge, if you put literally the URL for your badge, say on your Facebook page, that image is what your peers will see. And if they click on it, it's going to come back to this landing page at my website. And this is the information you would see for that specific badge. And so I want to take a second here and talk about these competencies. Notice that the first competency there is demonstrated the ability to productively discuss classroom assessment practices with professional peers, evidenced by the number and nature of comments on the individual Wikifolios. Right, so badges and competencies don't have to be about sort of measured competencies. Now, in the end, you can see from the last one, recognize effective and ineffective examples of classroom assessment practice. The expertise badge indicates an exam. So we do have the formal criteria here. But if you were to go in and this is on that same badge, it's just enlarged, you can see there on the left, Unit 2, okay, was on selected response formats. I can see it was complete. I can see that it was endorsed by 7 peers. There's 5 comments on it. And oh, someone marked it as being exemplary. And the badge would have explained this. And here you can see, if you click on that link, it goes to the work the student did. And in this case, here you can see this is a Wikifolio. This is the work they did. Here you can see what the peer said about it. It says at the top the number of endorsements and comments. The more specific competencies associated with that individual assignment are included in the badge. You can see that the earner, here they had to describe the context in which they were learning about assessment. Here you can see this effort where the student had to learn about the different formats and select which they thought were most relevant, create 2 examples of the one they were most relevant, learn about the item writing commandments as they were most relevant to them, and engage with them with their peers. In the end, this is what that all looked like. That's almost a complete one. It included a self-assessment. It included a reflection. Here's a really important thing. Here you can actually see the discussion. Here's what it looks like. This is in the badge. Here you see, if you really want to know whether they can do it, there's the evidence that they can do it. You can't measure whether or not someone can do this because, again, it's so contextual. Shift gears one last time. Yesterday, Connie Yowell mentioned Nate Otto's work. While I was sad he left my project, I was thrilled that he went on to Concentric Sky, where he has developed the Badger platform. This is what's been installed. The badge that Connie showed yesterday actually came out of my Educational Data Sciences course. We did this in Canvas this summer. This is a widely used learning management system that is OBI compliant. We're currently linking those Wikifolios you saw before using LTI into Canvas. We should have that up and running in about 6 months. This is Sandy. She's one of my open learners. There you can see her individual badges that she earned. Now, Sandy has not earned all 5 of the badges yet, and so therefore she hasn't gotten the course badge called Badge Check. And so, but I'll return to that. But this is the badge that Connie showed yesterday. Here you can see the various competencies, in this case, the Clinton. If you click on evidence, it's going to go to Clinton's Wikifolio, and there you can see enough context to see, yes, he learned about the different challenges in educational data sciences. He was able to interrogate how the EDM methods were relevant to that challenge. He was able to go off and find 3 additional outside resources that connected that work to his work. Here you see him discussing it not only with his peers, but one of those discussants is actually Ryan Baker, the author of the paper. That's a pretty impressive It's a piece of evidence. And so this is this thing called the badge check or a pathway. And this is what Clinton earned because he did complete all his badges. And all of the badges are contained in this larger badge. That's pretty exciting to us. Um, I'm going to stop here. We've got plenty of time for questions and discussions. I'll leave this slide up for a little while. If you have additional information, you really don't need to write these URLs down. If you Google Badge Alliance DPD project and Open Badges in Higher Ed or me, you'll find us. Thank you very much.